Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Arkansas history. Before we start, please leave a comment below telling us where you are and what time it is when you listen to this narration. We want to know where these written accounts go and what times of day or night they get there. The town of Jasper is still a quiet place where people stop for gas and locals chat on Main Street. It is located in the rugged Ozark Mountains of Newton County, Arkansas. But in 1920, this remote part of the United States held a mystery that would stay in the minds of the people who lived there forever. The events that took place at the Coones property, which is now County Road 74, 6 miles northwest of town, are some of the strangest in Arkansas criminal history. The bell at the First Methodist Church of Jasper rang as usual on Sunday morning, the 17th of October 1920. The people in the church came in, greeting each other and nodding. Ezra Coones, a 47-year-old farmer and handyman, was not there. He had never missed a Sunday service in 20 years, even though he was known to be a loner. The Newton County Historical Society has church records that show Reverend Thomas Whitfield wrote in the margin of his sermon notes, "E.C. absent, unusual." Sheriff Milton Pewitt rode out to the Coones homestead on Wednesday, when Ezra still hadn't been seen in town to get his mail or buy supplies at Wilson's General Store, as he always did. What he found there would lead to official investigations, rumors, and speculation that lasted well into the 1,960 seconds when the last living witness died, taking some secrets with them. The Coones property, which had been in the family since 1891, was about 85 acres of mostly wooded land, with about 20 acres cleared for farming. The main house was a 2-story building made of local oak and pine. It was on a small hill that looked out over the Buffalo River to the south. A broken-down barn leaned at a dangerous angle behind the house. Sheriff Pewitt's first report said that the padlock on the root cellar dug into the hillside east of the house looked unusually new compared to the rest of the property, which was in bad shape. The Ezra Coones case was strange, not only because he went missing, but also because of what was found in the house, the different stories told by the few people who knew him, and the strange things that happened to people who lived in or looked into the property later. The Newton County Courthouse records say that the case was officially closed in 1923 with the phrase, "whereabouts unknown, presumed deceased." However, documents found during a courthouse renovation in 1968 suggest a more complicated story that the authorities at the time may not have been able or willing to fully look into. A box of files labeled Coones 1920 in the dusty attic of the Newton County Courthouse had photos, interview transcripts, and personal items that tell a different story than what the official record says. This account is based on these documents, as well as diaries, letters, and oral histories that local historian Martha Burrows collected from people in Jasper between 1945 and 1962. What follows is more than just the story of a man who went missing. It's also a trip into the darkest parts of loneliness, delusion, and the terrible weight of secrets that have been kept too long. The Coones family had never been very big or very friendly. Records from the county show that Jeremiah Coones and his wife Sarah, along with their only son Ezra, who was 18 at the time, moved to Newton County in 1891. They bought the land from a banker in Harrison who had gotten it back after it was foreclosed on. Burroughs' interviews show that people in the area say that the previous owners left the property without warning, leaving behind clothes, furniture, and even food on the table. People at the time said that Jeremiah was strict but fair, didn't say much, went to church often, and didn't get involved in community affairs very much. People who remembered Sarah said she was even more reserved. She rarely went into town and only talked when someone spoke to her directly. Dr. Wilfred Hoskins' medical journal from 1897 says, "Mrs. C shows signs of depression and anxiety. Prescribe laudanum tincture, 15 drops as needed for sleep." Sarah died in 1899 of what was called wasting illness, but Dr. Hoskins privately thought it was tuberculosis. Jeremiah and Ezra stayed on the property after Sarah died. They farmed enough to feed themselves and sold the extra at the local market. In 1907, Jeremiah was found dead in the fields, apparently from heart failure. This left Ezra, who was 34 at the time, alone on the property. Tax records show that he still owned the land and farmed it, but on a smaller scale. He made extra money by working as a handyman in Jasper, where he became known as a skilled woodworker and a reliable, if a little strange, worker. He could fix just about anything, Thomas Wilson, owner of Wilson's General Store, told Burroughs in 1945. He was a quiet guy who kept to himself, but he did good work. He always paid his debts on time and in cash. I never saw him smile. Not once, in all those years. Not many people knew that Ezra had gone to school in a way that was unusual for rural Arkansas at the time. Harrison's school records show that he went to school until the 10th grade and got very good grades in math and science. Burroughs' research found a note from Ezra's old teacher that said he was very smart but shy and that he had strange interests in geology and astronomy that weren't part of our curriculum. The fact that the Coones property was so far away probably made Ezra want to be alone even more. The Hargrove family, who lived almost 2 miles away, was the closest neighbor. Eliza Hargrove, who was interviewed in 1946, remembered that her father sometimes hired Ezra to do carpentry work, but didn't like being around him for long periods of time. She told about a time in 1917 when Ezra came to their farm before dawn and said he had walked all night after seeing strange lights in the woods near his property. She remembered, Father gave him coffee and sent him home. Said it was just foxfire or lightning bugs, but Ezra was sure it was something else, something that moved with a purpose. Ezra's habits made it even more clear that he was missing. Every Wednesday, he would get to town shortly after noon, pick up his mail, buy things at Wilson's, and sometimes go to the barber shop. He went to church every Sunday and sat in the same pew near the back. After the service, he left right away and didn't stay for the usual social gathering. He never got married, and as far as anyone knew, he didn't have any close friends or people he could trust. Ezra Coones was last seen on Wednesday, the 13th of October 1920, when he went to town like he always did. Wilson's ledger shows that he bought coffee, flour, salt, kerosene, and 3 boxes of .30-30 rifle ammo. This last item is a little strange because Ezra usually only bought bullets before hunting season in November. The postal log says he got 2 pieces of mail, the Arkansas Farmer Homesteader monthly newsletter, and a letter from St. Louis, Missouri, but the sender is not known. In 1920, Clarence Jenkins worked at the post office and told Burroughs that Ezra seemed upset when he picked up his mail that day. Normally, he'd just nod and put the letters in his pocket. Jenkins said, that day, he ripped open the St. Louis letter right at the counter and read it twice. His hand was shaking. When I asked if everything was okay, he looked at me like he had forgotten I was there. He said something like, "It's confirmed then," and left without saying anything else. Ezra also acted differently than usual at Wilson's store. Grace Wilson, Thomas's wife, said that he spent almost 20 minutes looking at a county map on the wall, which was something he had never been interested in before. She heard him mumbling about where the northern borders were and where they met. When she asked him if he needed directions to a store, he quickly went back to shopping. Samuel Ritter, the barber, gave what may have been the most disturbing account of Ezra's last visit to town. Ritter told Sheriff Pruitt that Ezra didn't want his usual haircut. Instead, he wanted a mirror so he could look at the back of his own neck. Never seen a man so worried about the back of his neck, Ritter said. He kept turning around to see it from different angles. He asked me if I saw anything strange there. I told him there was nothing but a birthmark he'd always had. He seemed relieved, but said, "If it changes, if it starts to look different, you tell the sheriff right away." That was the strangest thing I ever had to do in 30 years of barbering. When Sheriff Pruitt got to the Coones property on Thursday, October 21st, everything looked strangely normal. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual for rural Arkansas at the time. At first, it didn't look like anything was missing inside. There was a half-full coffee cup on the kitchen table that had gone cold. Someone pulled out a chair, as if Ezra had just stepped away for a moment. His Winchester Model 1894 rifle was not where it usually was, above the fireplace, but his coat was still hanging by the door. Pruitt's report said that Ezra's bedroom was in the strangest condition. The bed was made, but there were clothes on top of it that looked like a person, with boots on one end and a hat on the other. Pruitt said it looked like someone had put clothes on the ground to look like a man sleeping. Next to this setup was a small wooden box with some folded papers in it. Puig took these papers as evidence. A search of the property didn't show any signs of foul play right away. Ezra's mule was in its stall, where it was well fed and watered. When the root cellar was opened, it had the expected supplies of preserved vegetables, cured meats, and other things, as well as something unexpected. Puig found a small door about 3 feet high in the far corner, partly hidden by shelves of mason jars. "It looks like an entrance to another room," Puig said in his report. "When I opened it, I found a room about 8 by 10, with a table, a chair, and a lot of papers stuck to the walls. I don't know what these papers are or what they mean at this time." Pictures taken by Puig's assistant, Vernon Ellis, show walls covered in newspaper clippings, hand-drawn maps, and what look like personal letters. There was a leather-bound journal and a kerosene lamp on the table. This journal, along with some papers that were taken from the walls, was used as evidence and described in detail in a supplement to Puig's report, dated the 23rd of October 1920. People immediately wanted to know more about the hidden room. County records show that the previous owners of the property built the root cellar, not the Coones family. Did Ezra find the secret room when he moved into the house, or did he make it himself? The building looked older than Ezra's time there, with support beams that looked very old. It was even more confusing why such a room would have been built in the first place. It was too small for practical storage and too inconvenient for regular use, but it was finished with surprising care, including a wooden floor when the main cellar only had packed earth. The journal, which covers the time from January 1919 to the 12th of October 1920, shows that Ezra's mental health got worse over time, but in a clear way. The first few entries are boring, just noting the weather, farm work, and the occasional trip to town. But by the middle of 1920, the entries are getting more paranoid and broken up. "Check the Northfield boundary again today. The stones have moved, I'm sure of it. Measured the distance to the large oak, now 127 paces, was 142 last fall. No natural explanation." Ezra started hearing strange noises in May. He said, "Tapping in the walls again last night, not mice or insects, too rhythmic, almost like code. Lasted from midnight until just before dawn. Sleep, impossible." In June, his worries grew. "They're watching the house again. Came back from the north field and saw fresh tracks by the, well, not animal. Too deliberate. They're getting bolder." By September, Ezra's entries suggest he was sleeping in the hidden room. Safer here. They can't get through these walls as easily. The old symbols father carved seem to slow them down. Must remember to lock the outer cellar door. The last entry, which was written on October 12, the day before Ezra's last trip to town, says, "It's in the walls." The newspaper clippings found in the secret room were mostly about people who had gone missing or died in strange ways in Arkansas and nearby states. Some of them were from 1899, the year Ezra Coones died. Ezra had written notes on many of them, including one about a family that went missing in Washington County in 1915. Next to it he wrote, "Same pattern, always," in October. One clipping from the Arkansas Gazette, dated the 26th of October, 1899, said that a trapper named Elias Whitby had gone missing from an area about 40 miles north of the Coones property. The article said that Whitby had been acting strangely in the weeks before he went missing. He said he had found something strange in a cave system. Ezra also wrote, "Mother knew him. She said he visited father once. What did they talk about?" Another clipping from 1907, the year Jeremiah died, talked about a strange geological event, a perfectly round hole that had appeared overnight in a field near Fayetteville. Geological experts said it was caused by karst activity, but Ezra had written in the margin, "Same as father found, not natural." There were letters between Ezra and someone named R.M. in the papers that were taken off the walls of Street Lewis. The letters, which were written between 1918 and 1920, talk about what they call the phenomenon and mention similar events that happened in other places. The last letter from R.M., postmarked the 10th of October, 1920, and probably one of the letters Ezra got on his last trip to town, says, "Do not try to find out more on your own. Will arrive by the end of the month. Tell no one." Who is R.M. was still a mystery to investigators at the time. People who sent inquiries to the return address in street. Louis got back letters that said, "No such person at this address." Burroughs got city records in 1952 that showed the building listed had been home to the Midwestern Society for Geological Research, a small private group that went out of business in 1921, just after Ezra went missing. According to Deputy Ellis's personal notes that Burroughs got, the most disturbing thing found in the secret room was a small leather pouch with what looked like human teeth inside. At least 3 different people owned the items, according to laboratory tests done at the state capitol. There is no record of this evidence in the official case file. When Burroughs asked Ellis about it in 1950, he said he didn't remember it, even though he had written down a detailed description of it at the time. Sheriff Pruitt, who was dealing with an unusual situation but didn't have any clear proof of a crime, first called the case a missing person investigation. A search party that went out on October 24th looked through the woods and along the banks of the Buffalo River, but they couldn't find Ezra or his rifle. The investigation came to a halt because there was no body and no clear sign of foul play. Luther Holcomb, a member of the search party, said he saw strange carvings on trees in the northern part of the property. He said they looked kind of like letters, but not English or any language I know. Sheriff Pruitt dismissed this finding, saying they were probably old trail markers or property boundary signs. The next day, when Holcomb took a deputy back to the site, he couldn't find the marked trees again, saying that the area looked different somehow. What happened next added a lot to the case's long-lasting mystery. A fire broke out on the Coones property on the 2nd of November 1920, and it completely destroyed the main house. When neighbors saw the fire and got there, the building had already fallen down. The official cause was listed as unknown, but people guessed that it could have been anything from an unattended kerosene lamp to planned arson. James Hargrove, who tried to put out the fire but failed, later told his daughter Eliza that the flames acted unlike any fire I've ever seen. She remembered her father's story, saying that the fire burned in an unusual color, not orange or red, but almost blue-white, especially at the center, and it made a sound, not crackling like normal fire, but a low humming that made your teeth ache. The root cellar and its secret room, on the other hand, survived the fire. But when they looked at it later, all the papers were gone from the walls, and the journal was missing, even though it had been logged into evidence at the sheriff's office. Years later, when asked about this difference, former Deputy Ellis said that the journal and papers had been sent to the state capitol for analysis and had never come back. State records show that Ellis's story is not true because they did not receive any evidence. Ellis's resignation from the sheriff's office in December 1920 and sudden departure from Newton County were even more concerning. In 1923, he showed up again in Oklahoma, where he worked as a night watchman at an oil field. Burroughs found him in 1950 living in a small apartment in Tulsa. His landlady said he was having terrible nightmares and a nervous condition that makes him afraid of the dark. The county started probate proceedings in December 1920, when Ezra was still missing and thought to be dead. Because Ezra didn't have any known heirs, the property would have gone to the state. But on December 18, a man named Robert Marshfield came from Street Louis with papers saying he was Ezra's second cousin and rightful heir. Judge William Hargrove looked over the paperwork and decided it was enough. Marshfield then took ownership of the property. Burroughs looked at the documents decades later and saw that they looked old, but there were a few mistakes in them. The family Bible, which was used as proof of the relationship, had different paper and ink qualities on the page that listed Marshfield's connection to the Coones family. More importantly, church records from Ezra's home state of Tennessee, which Burroughs got in 1958, did not mention the branch of the family that Marshfield said he was related to. When Marshfield came to Jasper, it caused a lot of excitement. Several people said he was tall, well-dressed, and spoke with what some called a Eastern accent. He hired local men to clear the burned house and start building a new, smaller cabin near the original foundation. He also spent a lot of time looking at the hidden room and the root cellar. James Puitt, who is not related to the sheriff, said in a 1947 interview, "He had us dig all around that cellar. We paid him a lot of money. But he wouldn't say what he was looking for. He made us dig 6 feet down in some places. I never saw anything he found, but he seemed very interested in the soil itself. He kept taking samples in small glass jars." Marshfield didn't stay in Jasper for long. He sold the land to a cattle rancher from Harrison in February 1921 and left. Records show that he sold the land for a lot less than what it was worth. We don't know where he went after leaving Jasper, but Martha Burroughs' research found a death certificate for a Robert Marshfield in Philadelphia dated the 17th of October 1925, exactly 5 years after Ezra's disappearance was first reported. The death certificate said the person died from acute respiratory failure following severe trauma. Burroughs got the coroner's notes by writing to the Philadelphia authorities over and over again. The notes said the injuries were not consistent with an accident or common assault, and they included strange marks on the back of the neck and upper spine. The coroner also said that the body showed signs of advanced decay that didn't match the time of death, which made it hard to do a thorough examination. Henry Gladwell, the cattle rancher who bought the land, never lived there. He only used it for grazing. Until 1927, when Gladwell hired Vincent Holloway to live on the property and take care of it, the small cabin Marshfield had built was mostly empty. Holloway's time at the property adds to the mystery. He wrote to his sister in Little Rock, and the letters are still in the Arkansas State Archives. At first, he said the place was peaceful enough, if a bit lonely. But by 1928, his letters had become darker. He wrote in August 1928, "There is something not right about this place. The cattle won't graze in the Northfield, no matter how green it gets. They just stand at the fence line and bellow. And the sounds at night, like something moving in the walls of the cabin. Mr. Gladwell thinks it's raccoons, but I've trapped for them and found nothing." Holloway said in September 1928 that he had found the remains of the original root cellar and its hidden room. He wrote, "Explored the old cellar," Mr. Gladwell mentioned. "Most of it's collapsed now, but there's a section still intact. A small room behind the main space. Found some strange carvings on the support beams. Not just initials or dates, but complex designs. Almost like writing, but not any alphabet I recognize. Similar to what I've seen carved on some of the older trees up north." Holloway said in October 1928 that he had found strange carvings on trees at the northern edge of the property. He said they were not letters exactly, nor pictures, but deliberate all the same. He sent a rough sketch with his letter that showed symbols that look like cattle brands, but don't match any known markings in the area. Burroughs asked a linguistics professor at the University of Arkansas to look at the sketch in 1960. The professor saw some similarities to Native American pictographs, but couldn't say which tribe it came from. He also pointed out that the symbols looked like ones found at archaeological sites in southern Missouri that are thought to be hundreds of years older than the first known tribal settlements. The last letter from Holloway, dated the 15th of October 1928, talks about plans to check out a depression in the ground he found about a quarter-mile north of the cabin. Looks like a sinkhole starting, but it's a perfect circle about 6 feet across. The ground feels strange there, like it's empty. I'm going to check it tomorrow. The letter had a rough map showing where the depression was in relation to other things on the property. He also said that he planned to bring a camera he had just bought from a catalog to take pictures of what he found. Could a cave system down there explain some of the sounds I've been hearing? Sound travels in strange ways, underground. Gladwell sent 2 ranch hands to check on Holloway on October 18th when he didn't pick up the supplies that had been left for him in Jasper. They saw that the cabin was empty and there was no sign of trouble. Holloway's coat and boots were still there, along with a few other things. The men said they called for him and looked around the area, but they didn't go to the northern part of the property because it was getting dark and a storm was coming. Burroughs noticed something in their report that they hadn't at the time. A strange smell in the cabin that one of the men said was like lightning just struck nearby. That sharp, burning smell. The same man also said he saw marks on the floor, like something wet had been dragged across it, leading from the bedroom to the front door. Sheriff Leland Puitt, the son of Milton Pwitt, who retired in 1926, did a more thorough search of the whole property on October 20th. This search included the depression mentioned in Holloway's letter. The official report says that they found a circular area about 6 feet across where the ground had dropped about 18 inches. There was no sign of tunneling or any other reason for the subsidence. There was no sign of Holloway or any idea of what might have happened to him. The search party did find Holloway's camera hanging from a tree branch about 50 yards away from the depression. The developed film had 6 pictures, 5 of the circular depression from different angles, and one that the technician said was too overexposed to make out clearly. This last picture was not put in the case file and is thought to be lost. The second disappearance from the same property, which happened almost exactly 8 years after Ezra's disappearance, brought the original case back into the news. Sheriff Leland Pwitt looked through his father's files and tried to find the evidence that was gathered in 1920, especially Ezra's journal and the papers from the secret room. County records, on the other hand, showed that a small fire at the courthouse in 1924 destroyed these items. The fire only damaged the evidence storage area and was later found to be arson, but no one was ever charged. Gladwell sold the cattle business after Holloway went missing. The land stayed empty until 1935, when the newly formed Ozarks National Forest bought it as part of a land acquisition program during the Great Depression. Forest rangers used the cabin from time to time, but it was never lived in full time. Raymond Carter, a Forest Service worker, spent 3 nights in the cabin in 1942 while doing a resource survey. His field notes, which are kept in the Forest Service archives in Harrison, have a strange entry for April 17th, 2:15 a.m. I woke up to the sound of scratching in the walls. It was too rhythmic for rodents, almost like Morse code, but with no pattern I could see. It lasted about 45 minutes and then stopped suddenly. I will ask maintenance to check the structure for an infestation. Carter's notes for the next day talk about how he explored the property and found strange circular depressions in the north. He counted 7 of these depressions, which were all perfectly circular and ranged in size from 2 to 8 feet in diameter. He said they were arranged in a pattern suggesting deliberate placement rather than natural formation. He also drew a sketch showing the depressions forming a rough semicircle that opened to the north. A maintenance report filed the following week says, "Examined cabin walls for evidence of pests. Found no access points or nests. Structure sound. Note, observed unusual cold spot in any corner of main room. Possible draft source, unidentified. Recommend further examination when budget permits." This report was filed by Maintenance Supervisor Edward Gaines, who later told Burroughs that he had actually found something unusual during his inspection, but was told by his boss not to include it in the official report. Gaines says that he found a small hole in the wall in the northeast corner that looked like it had a cloth bundle in it. He felt like an electrical shock when he tried to take it off, and his arm was numb for a few days. He told the district ranger about it, and the ranger came and took the bundle away, telling Gaines to forget about it. There were no more tests recorded, and the cabin was only used occasionally in the 1940 seconds and early 1950 seconds. The Forest Service tore down the cabin in 1953 as part of a program to modernize its facilities. The cabin had fallen into disrepair. The root cellar, on the other hand, was kept and strengthened in case of an emergency. While the workers were fixing up the building, they found something that wasn't recorded in official Forest Service records. Oscar Jenkins, one of the workers, told Martha Burroughs about it in an interview in 1962. "When we were fixing up the walls of that old cellar, we found something stuck behind one of the support beams. It looked like it had been put there on purpose. It was a rusty tin box that was still intact. Inside was a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth that were still readable." Jenkins said that the papers looked like pages ripped from a journal, and the handwriting was similar to what Burroughs showed him from documents that were known to be Ezra's. Jenkins said that the pages had ravings about something living in the woods, something that could change its shape. It said it had taken his mother, then his father, and was coming for him next. It said it needed the blood of his bloodline to stay in this world. Jenkins said that when the site foreman saw what was in the box, he told the workers to forget about it and took the items. When Burroughs tried to confirm this story with the foreman, Charles Danning, he said he didn't know anything about it. Records from the Forest Service show that Danning suddenly quit his job in November 1953, less than a month after the renovation project, and moved to Oregon. Burroughs was determined to find Danning, and in 1961 he finally did, in a small town on the coast of Oregon. According to her notes from their short phone call, Danning was rude at first and wouldn't talk about his time in Arkansas. When Burroughs brought up the Coones property, Danning reportedly got angry and asked, "How did you find me? Did they send you?" before hanging up the phone. Danning moved again soon after the call, leaving no forwarding address. Attempts to set up a face-to-face interview failed. In 1955, the University of Arkansas did a geological survey of Newton County and found that the area where the old Coones property was located had strange underground features that were consistent with the formation of large caves. The report said that the region's limestone composition would usually lead to more gradual and uneven karst development. This made the perfectly circular surface expression seen in the northern section worth looking into more closely. This suggestion led to a more in-depth study in 1958 by a group led by Dr. Harold Winters, a geologist who studies karst topography. Winters' team did soil tests, ground-penetrating radar surveys, which were a new technology at the time, and some digging around some of the depressions. In a 1959 paper in the Journal of Speleological Studies, they wrote about a network of chambers and passages about 50 to 75 feet below the surface that did not behave like normal limestone dissolution processes. More controversially, Winters posited that specific characteristics suggested potential anthropogenic alterations of natural cave formations originating from an unspecified pre-Columbian era. Many of Winters' co-workers were skeptical of this claim and thought that the strange formations were caused by natural processes that scientists still don't fully understand. But the paper did get the attention of a few archaeologists who were interested in how caves were used before Columbus in the Ozark area. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, an archaeologist, got permission to do a preliminary survey of the site in 1962. Her field notes, which are kept at the University of Arkansas, talk about finding pieces of artifacts whose origins are not clear near one of the larger depressions. These included pottery shards with decorative elements that don't fit with known indigenous styles in the area. She suggested a full archaeological dig, but they couldn't afford to do it. Montgomery's job took her to other places, but she still cared about the site. In a letter to Burroughs in 1967, she said, "I still believe that something important lies beneath that property, something that predates any recorded human habitation in the region. The patterns we saw suggest purpose, design, not random geological processes, but intentionality." The last chapter in the documented history of the Ezra Coones case happened in 1965 when Martin Reynolds, a geology student at the University of Arkansas, was doing a survey of karst formations in Newton County. Reynolds's field journal, which is kept at the university library, talks about his investigation of a big sinkhole formation on what was once the northern part of the Coones property. He wrote, "Sinkhole approximately 20 feet in diameter. Conical depression leading to a vertical shaft. Depth of shaft measured at 47 feet to a ledge with a secondary drop beyond that point. Shaft walls show unusual smoothness, not typical of natural karst processes. Planned to return with proper equipment for full descent." Reynolds came back on the 17th of October 1965, exactly 45 years after Ezra Coones was first reported missing. He was with another student, Peter Garrison, who later told what happened. Garrison says that they set up a rope system and Reynolds climbed down into the shaft. They kept in touch by radio, and Reynolds said that at the bottom of the secondary drop, about 75 feet below the surface, there was a chamber that was about 30 feet across. He saw strange shapes on the walls that he first thought were mineral deposits, but when he looked more closely, he realized they were carvings or inscriptions of some kind. Reynolds said the room felt unnaturally cold, even though it was only moderately cool outside in the fall. He also said that his voice had a strange sound quality, saying that it seemed to echo longer than it should in a room that size. His description of what looked like a perfectly round hole in the floor of the chamber, like a well shaft, but horizontal instead of vertical, that went deeper into the earth was the most interesting part. Garrison said that Reynolds' last message was, "There's something else down here. Looks like, oh God, I think it's." Then the radio made a burst of static, and Garrison said it sounded like no human voice I've ever heard. When Reynolds didn't answer more calls, Garrison tried to pull him up with their rope system. The end of the rope looked like it had melted or dissolved rather than cut, according to Garrison. Garrison quickly called for help, and a rescue team got to the scene just before nightfall. But by the time the rescue workers were ready to go down, something new had happened that made it impossible to get in. The shaft, which had been open and stable during Reynolds' descent, had completely collapsed. After several equipment failures and what the incident report calls hazardous gas emissions from the collapsed opening, the excavation efforts were called off. The official story said that the collapse was caused by natural geological instability. Burroughs' engineers, on the other hand, said that a sudden and complete collapse like this would be very unusual for a shaft that had not shown any signs of instability during Reynolds' descent just a few hours earlier. In 1966, the University of Arkansas put up a memorial plaque for Reynolds near the site. The Forest Service's records show that the area was marked as off-limits for safety reasons, and in 1968 the sinkhole and the 5 acres around it were fenced off. Garrison was the last person to interview Martha Burroughs about the Coones case in 1967. By that time, he had finished his geology degree but had given up on going to graduate school. He was a science teacher at a high school in Fort Smith and didn't want to talk about what happened at first. He finally agreed to add one detail that wasn't in the official report. Before the static, before that inhuman sound, Martin said something else. He said, "The walls are moving." Those were his exact words. "The walls are moving," just like what they found written in Ezra's journal. After what happened, I looked into the history of that place. Too many coincidences, too many disappearances, always in October, always without a trace. Garrison's story had more details that he hadn't shared before. He said that Reynolds had been having strange symptoms in the days leading up to their trip. He said he had headaches and that it felt like something was pushing against the back of his head. He also talked about dreams, always the same one, about standing in a round room with symbols on the walls that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Garrison's claim that Reynolds had gotten an anonymous letter at his university office just days before their trip was the most upsetting. There was no return address on the envelope, just his name. There was only one piece of paper inside. It had a rough drawing of a round hole with a person standing next to it to show how big it was. There were only 3 words below the drawing. "Not in October." Martin thought it was a prank from another student. "Now I'm not so sure," Garrison said. Garrison also said that he had gone back to the site by himself in the spring of 1966, which was against Forest Service rules. "I needed to know if anything was left, any proof of what happened to Martin." The collapse made a shallow basin that was about 3 feet deep in the middle. The soil in that basin was different, darker, almost black, and had an oily sheen. Nothing grows there when it rains, not even weeds. I took a sample and had a friend in the chemistry department look at it. He couldn't figure out some of the compounds and said the molecular structure was strange. Garrison was very clear when asked if he thought there was a link between Reynolds' death and the earlier disappearances of Ezra Coones and Vincent Holloway. "I'm sure of it. Whatever's under that ground has been taking people for a long time, and I think it's getting stronger and more active. The incidents are getting closer together." First Ezra, then 8 years later Holloway, then 37 years to Reynolds. But there have been others, I'm sure of it, people who went missing in those woods that were never connected to the pattern. Burroughs died in 1969, and her collection of interviews and research went to the Newton County Historical Society. They were mostly forgotten until people started to become more interested in local history in the early 2000s when they were found and cataloged. A strange footnote to Burroughs' work came to light in 1971, 2 years after she died. A survey team mapping the newly established Buffalo National River found a group of stone cairns in a remote area about a mile north of the old Coones property. There were 12 cairns in a perfect circle that was 50 feet wide. In the middle was a bigger pile of stones with a flat slab on top. There were carvings on the slab that looked like the ones Holloway found in 1928. Dr. William Martinez, an archaeologist with the Park Service, looked at the site and said that the cairns were built on purpose, but it was hard to tell how old they were because they had been weathered and there were no artifacts found with them. He wrote in his report that the symbols bear no clear relationship to known indigenous petroglyph styles of the Ozark region. But he thought they might be an unusual way of expressing folk magic practices that were documented in isolated communities in the area in the 19th century. Martinez suggested looking into it more, but before that could happen, a lot of rain in the spring of 1973 changed the landscape a lot. When researchers went back to take better pictures of the cairns, they found that the site was covered by several feet of silt and debris that had been left behind by the floodwaters. Attempts to move the exact location using survey coordinates later failed, leading to speculation that the whole formation had been washed away. Michael Thornton, a ranger with the Park Service, said in 1978 that he found a single standing stone about half a mile from where the cairn circle was thought to be. The stone was about 3 feet tall and 18 inches wide, and had markings that were similar to those that Martinez had written about. Thornton took pictures of the stone, but he didn't write down where it was. 2 weeks later, when he came back with the archaeological team, they couldn't find the stone, even after a long search. Thornton asked to be moved to another park the next year. In a personal letter to a coworker that researchers found in 2005, he explained his choice. "I can't stay after what I've seen and heard in those woods. The dream started when I found that stone. It's always the same. I'm standing in a circle of stones, and something is rising from the ground at the center. It has no fixed shape, but seems to be made of darkness itself. When I wake up, my bed sheets are soaked with sweat, and I can still hear the whispering that filled the dream. Words in no language I recognize, but that I almost understand." The Buffalo National River, which was established in 1972, now includes the land that used to belong to the Coones family. The forest has taken over the land where the house and root cellar used to be, and there are no signs of people living there. The area where the sinkhole was is still off limits. On Forest Service maps, it is marked as hazardous terrain, no entry. A group of hikers who broke the rules and went into the restricted area in 1982 said they saw a perfect circle of dead plants that was about 30 feet wide. They told the Park Service that the ground inside the circle looked burned, as if by very hot heat, even though there was no sign of a regular fire. Park rangers who looked into it didn't find any such formation, but they did say that one of the hikers needed medical help for what was called acute anxiety and disorientation after the event. In 1994, Dr. Samuel Crawford, a controversial figure known for his interest in fringe theories about pre-Columbian cultures in North America, led an unauthorized archaeological expedition that tried to use ground-penetrating radar to survey the northern part of the old Coones property. Park Service workers caught Crawford and his team of 3 graduate students before they could finish their work, but not before they had collected some initial data. Crawford's academic reputation had already been hurt by his support of strange theories, and most archaeologists didn't believe the results of his short survey. But his raw data, which he published in a small journal of alternative archaeology, showed what looked like a series of perfectly round rooms connected by straight passages about 60 feet below the surface. Professional geologists who looked at the data said it probably showed natural cave formations that showed up regularly in the radar images because of the equipment's limitations. Crawford held the belief, until his death in 2001, that the formations were man-made by a civilization that existed before any known North American cultures. He wrote in his last published paper that the Coones property was part of a network of power sites across the Ozarks. He linked these sites to the disappearances of Ezra Coones, Vincent Holloway, and Martin Reynolds, as well as many other missing persons cases that have been going on for more than a century. Crawford's theories didn't get much support from academics, but they did get some attention from people who study the paranormal and conspiracy theorists. Several unauthorized expeditions tried to get into the restricted area in the 1992 and early 2000s. This made the Park Service increase patrols and put up stronger fences. Dr. Laura Chen, a biologist with the Park Service, noticed an unusual pattern of plants near the old Coones property in 2005 as part of a regular survey of resources. She wrote in her report that she found concentric rings of plant growth, with the types of plants changing a lot between rings. In the middle of these rings, which were about 100 feet across, she saw stunted growth and strange shapes in species that are usually common. Soil samples from this area showed that the minerals and pH levels were not normal for the area around it. Chen said that these strange things could be caused by underground hydrological features that affect how nutrients are spread. This is a natural explanation that still suggests something strange is going on below the surface. Chen also said that electronic devices like GPS units and digital cameras often broke down in this area. She thought this might be due to electromagnetic interference from mineral deposits, but she also pointed out that the way the equipment was failing was strange. It only failed when it was pointed or directed toward the center of the concentric vegetation rings. In 2008, Newton County had a number of small earthquakes, which is not common for the area. Seismologists at the University of Arkansas found a group of small earthquakes, none of which were stronger than 2.5 on the Richter scale, with their epicenters less than a mile from the old Coones property. Dr. James Harden, who looked at the data, said that the pattern of seismic activity was more like subsidence events than tectonic movement. This means that cave collapses or other underground structural failures could happen. Subsequent surveys conducted in 2009 revealed that the tremors had substantially transformed the subterranean landscape. When compared to older geological data, it looked like there had been big changes in the shape of what were thought to be cave systems. Some passages had collapsed, while others seemed to have grown. The most important thing is that the circular chambers that Crawford found in his controversial 1994 survey were no longer visible in the new data. It was as if they had either completely collapsed or been filled in some way. We still don't know what happened to Ezra Coones, Vincent Holloway, Martin Reynolds, or maybe even more people. The official records give us a timeline of events and some basic facts, but the truth is hidden in the gaps between those facts, in the missing evidence, the conflicting stories, and the strange things that have been found over the years. A court clerk in Jasper found a sealed envelope hidden inside the cover of a property deed book from the 1920 seconds while digitizing old county records in 2010. The envelope was yellowed with age and contained a single sheet of paper that looked like a handwritten note from Sheriff Milton Pewitt. It was dated the 5th of November 1920, just days after the fire at the Coones property. The note, which was never officially filed, said, "I found something at the Coones place that I can't explain. I didn't want to put it in the report." After the fire, when we were checking for hot spots, Thompson and I dug through the ashes where Ezra's bedroom had been. Under the floorboards, we found a metal box that survived the heat. Inside was what looked like a journal, older than Ezra's, probably his father's from the dates. Most pages were too damaged to read, but one had a drawing, a circle with smaller circles inside it, like a target. Next to it, written in what looked like blood, "It comes through the circles when October thins the veil." Thompson wanted to keep investigating, but I told him to leave it be. Some things shouldn't be disturbed. I'm putting this note here in case something happens to me. If you're reading this, be warned. Stay away from the North Field. Some people think this document is real, while others think it might be a modern forgery meant to trick people. Experts in handwriting looked at it, though, and said it was consistent with other examples of Pewitt's writing and that the paper and ink were from the right time period. Local historians became interested in the Coones case again after the discovery. In 2012, the Newton County Historical Society put together a panel of experts in archaeology, geology, and folklore to talk about the different theories about the disappearances that happened on the property. Even though no agreement was reached, the event brought attention to the mystery that has lasted for so long and its importance to local history. In 2015, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the archaeologist who had looked into the site for a short time in 1962, broke decades of silence on the subject. This was perhaps the most interesting thing that happened in recent years. Montgomery, who is now in her 82nd and no longer works in academia, gave an interview to a regional historical journal in which she said that her interest in the Coones property was sparked by something she found during her initial survey that she had never included in her official report. "We found a room," she said. "Not a natural cave, but something built. The entrance had been sealed with fitted stones, some weighing hundreds of pounds. We documented it but didn't open it. That would have required resources we didn't have and permissions we couldn't get. I submitted photographs and coordinates separately to my department head, but they were never acknowledged. When I inquired later, I was told my materials had been misplaced. I always wondered if someone else went back there, someone with more authority than a junior archaeologist on her first field assignment." Montgomery said she had waited more than 50 years to share this information because fear, at first. "I was told in no uncertain terms that discussing unauthorized findings would end my career. Later, after I was established, it was easier to focus on other sites, other projects. But I've never forgotten what we found, or the symbols carved into those ceiling stones. The same symbols that keep appearing in every account of the Coones property, from Ezra's time to the present." Montgomery's claim couldn't be checked out because she didn't have any proof of the supposed chamber, and the site had changed a lot since her survey. She died in 2017, and any other information she had went with her. People in Jasper still talk about the Coones case in quiet tones. They talk about weird noises in the woods north of town, animals that won't graze in certain places, and hikers who say they get confused for a moment when they pass near the old property line. People say that in October the veil between worlds gets thinner, making it easier for things that live in the deep woods to cross over. Jake Thornton, a local guide who leads authorized hiking tours in the Buffalo National River area, says that some visitors do ask about the Coones legend. "I tell them the facts, that people went missing, that the area has some strange geological features, and that parts of the old property are off limits for safety reasons. I don't make it sound better, but I don't ignore it either. Something happened there. I can't say if it was something boring that got blown out of proportion over time or something that really can't be explained." Thornton says he had an unexplained experience near the old Coones property in October 2018. "I was marking a trail for a guided hike the next day, about half a mile from the restricted area. It was late afternoon, still plenty of light, when I heard what sounded like someone calling my name. Not loudly, more like a whisper that somehow carried through the trees. I called back, thinking it might be another hiker, but no one answered. He says he felt suddenly cold, like walking into a refrigerated room, even though it was a mild autumn day. Then I noticed how quiet it was. There were no birds, no bugs, and I couldn't even hear the leaves rustling, even though I could see the trees moving in the wind. It lasted for about 30 seconds and then everything was back to normal. I've lived in these woods my whole life and I've never seen anything like that before or since." Science points to natural causes. Karst topography often has sinkholes. Being alone can make you paranoid and delusional. Coincidences, no matter how strange, are still coincidences. But there are still questions. What did Ezra learn from his research? What was the phenomenon that he talked about with the mysterious RM, who later showed up as Robert Marshfield to claim the land? What did Holloway find that had markings on it? And what did Reynolds see deep inside the earth? In 2019, geological surveys using advanced imaging techniques showed that the area under the old Coones property has a very complicated network of caves and chambers. Dr. Rebecca Winters, whose team did the study, said, "Most of these features can be explained by natural karst processes. However, Winters pointed out a few strange things. She wrote in her published findings, "There are structures about 70 feet below the surface that show patterns that are not usually seen in natural cave formations. Perfect circular chambers, connected by straight passages at consistent angles. Nature tends to be more irregular. While we're not suggesting artificial construction, these features warrant further investigation." Winters also said that some places showed signs of recent activity, with passages that were open in surveys from the early 2000s now collapsed or filled, and new openings appearing in other places. She said, "The underground landscape is always changing, but the way and speed of change in this area is strange. The most troubling thing about the case is that it keeps happening. People keep going missing, always in October, and there is never a solution. The pattern makes it look like something is planned, patient, and waits in the Ozark forests for the right time to come out. According to records from the Park Service, 7 hikers have gone missing within 5 miles of the old Coones property between 1972 and 2020. 5 were eventually found, confused but unharmed, but 2 are still missing. Both people who went missing were interested in the Coones legend before they went hiking in October 1987 and 2003. Martha Burrows wrote in her last notes on the case, just before she died, "I no longer believe we are dealing with murder or madness in any conventional sense. Whatever happened at the Coones property transcends ordinary criminal investigation. Some secrets are buried too deep, literally and figuratively, to be uncovered by conventional means, and perhaps some secrets should remain buried." Every year, thousands of people come to see the Buffalo National River. They hike its trails, float its waters, and take in the stunning beauty of the Ozarks. Few people know that they are passing by one of Arkansas's most puzzling mysteries. Even fewer people hear the whispers that sometimes come from the deep woods on October nights. These whispers sound like words, but not quite like warnings. As part of his research into Ozark legends, Dr. Thomas Blackwood, a professor of folklore at the University of Arkansas, has looked into the Coones case. He says, "What makes this story compelling is how it weaves together elements of documented fact, the disappearances, the unusual geological features, the recurring symbols with the darker threads of folklore that run through these mountains." Blackwood points out that there are indigenous legends from before Europeans came that talk about places where the ground breathes and circles where the worlds touch, which are often linked to disappearances or changes. These mountains have been around for a long time, he says. People have lived there for thousands of years, and stories build up in the land, like sediment, layer upon layer. What happened to Ezra Coones and the others may have been a new chapter in a story that has been going on for a long time. In 2020, when the Buffalo National River was closed because of the pandemic, remote sensing equipment that was set up near the closed area for an environmental monitoring project picked up on something strange. Seismographs picked up what technicians called microtremors for 2 weeks in October. These were vibrations that were too small for people to feel but were consistent in pattern and timing, happening every night between 2 and 3 a.m. The monitoring report said that audio equipment at the same location picked up anomalous acoustic phenomena, which were rhythmic sounds that were below the level of normal human hearing, but were clearly different from sounds made by animals or rocks. Acoustic analysts found that when these recordings were filtered and amplified, they showed patterns that looked like communication, with the same elements repeated in different orders. There is one last thing to say about this story before it ends. According to records from the Forest Service, a routine survey of the restricted area in October 2017 showed that the fencing had been broken. Rangers found a backpack, water bottle, and flashlight inside the perimeter, but no sign of the person who owned them. The gear was in good shape and looked like it had just been left behind. There was never a missing person report that matched the event. There was a journal in the backpack that had entries about how much the owner loved the Coones legend and wanted to find out what was under the circles. The last entry, dated October 17th, says, "Made it past the fence just before sunset. The ground here feels different underfoot, almost like it's vibrating slightly. Found a depression that matches the descriptions, about 20 feet, across, and perfectly circular. The soil at the center looks disturbed, as if something has been digging from below. Going to set up camera traps before dark and wait. If I'm right, if the pattern holds, something should happen around midnight. The walls between worlds are thinnest now. There is no name in the journal, and attempts to identify its owner through fingerprints or other forensic means were unsuccessful. The other tools did not include the camera traps that were mentioned in the entry. The Ozarks walls keep their secrets. The forest takes back what it has lost. And in Jasper, Arkansas, old-timers still tell people not to go too far north of town when the winds start to blow in October and the lines between worlds become thin. In the archives of the Newton County Historical Society, there is a single sheet of paper that looks like a transcription of part of Ezra Coones's last journal entry. It is next to Martha Burroughs's detailed notes and interviews, more complete than the often quoted "It's in the Walls." The full passage, if authentic, offers a chilling glimpse into Ezra's final hours. It's in the walls now. I can hear it moving, searching. The symbols Father carved only slow it down. They don't stop it anymore. Perhaps they never truly did. I understand now why Mother wasted away, why Father's heart gave out. It wasn't illness or age. It was the slow drain of whatever it takes from us. The Marshfield letters confirm what I've suspected. It needs our family, our bloodline, to maintain its presence here. Why us? I still don't know. Something in our veins it finds sustaining. Tomorrow, I'll set the trap. The clothing on the bed should buy me time to reach the north field and collapse the entrance. If I succeed, let this record stand as warning. If I fail, God help whoever comes after me. The circles are thinning. October calls it forth. It is impossible to know if these words really belong to Ezra Coones or if they were added later, but they echo across a century of strange events, disappearances, and whispered warnings, leaving behind a legacy of mystery that still haunts the dark hollows of the Ozarks.